Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the 12th episode of the Eid milad nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam 2022 special. Today we will look at the farewell pilgrimage, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam had become the most powerful leader in the whole of the Arabia. After the idols in the Kaaba had been smashed and the Quraysh had become Muslim, most of the other tribes in Arabia came to declare Islam. The year in which they came was later to be called the year of deputations. As each tribe joined Islam, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent his men to teach them about their new religion. Many people also came to Medina to question the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. One tribe sent a man called Dimam, who was large and strong. On arriving in Medina, he went straight to the masjid where Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting with some of his companions, and stood over the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In a loud, rough voice, he asked, "Which of you is the son of Abdul Muttalib?" When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam answered him, the Imam went on, "I am going to ask you a hard question, so do not misunderstand me. I ask you to swear by Allah, your Allah, the Allah of those before you and the Allah of those who will come after you. Has He sent you to us as a messenger?" "Yes, He has," replied the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. "Has Allah instructed you to order us to serve Him, or to pray these 5 prayers, to pay alms, to fast, to make the pilgrimage, and to follow the other laws of Islam?" continued Imam. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam answered that Allah has indeed instructed him in this way, the Imam became a Muslim, and as he left added, "Then I will do the things we are told to do and avoid the things we are forbidden to do." As the Imam mounted his camel to leave, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told the people around him, "If this man is sincere, he will go to paradise." When the Imam reached his people, they all thought that he had gone mad, but by nightfall, after he had finished speaking, there was not among them that had not accepted Islam. When the time came for the yearly pilgrimage, it was proclaimed that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be going to Mecca. The Muslims flocked to Medina from all over Arabia to join him on his journey to the Kaaba. As the tribes arrived, they camped around the city until they finally numbered more than 30,000. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam went out with his family and friends to the pilgrimage, but before setting off, he led all the Muslims in prayer. After the prayers, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam got on his camel and headed towards Mecca, followed by the pilgrims, all of whom, for the first time in centuries, worshipped Allah, the only God. The Prophet and his companions were deeply moved by the sight of the huge number of Muslims accompanying them to Mecca, carrying no arms and fearing no one. They could not help but remember their original flights from Mecca, when they had been so few in number and were forced to leave in order to avoid the anger of the Quraysh. Throughout the journey, the Muslims repeated a prayer taught to them by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which he in turn has received from Angel Jibril. This prayer, the Talbiyah, has been part of the Hajj ritual ever since. It is an answer to the call Ibrahim was commanded to make when he and Ismail finished building the Kaaba. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, labbaik la sharika laka labbaik, innal hamda wan ni'mata laka wal mulk la sharika lak. Here I am, O Allah, at thy service. Here I am, thou art without partner. Here I am, all praise and blessings are thine, and dominion. Thou art without partner. After 10 days, the pilgrims marched at sunset through the same pass by which they had entered on the day of the conquest of Mecca. When they reached the Kaaba, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood before it in prayer. Then he and all the Muslims walked around it 7 times, saying their prayer aloud. Next, just as Ibrahim alayhi salam had done, they went towards the Mount of Mercy at Arafah, which the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam ascended on a camel. On the mountain, He led the people in prayer and then spoke to them as they stood assembled on the vast plain below. What the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said is known as the farewell sermon, because it was the last speech of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made before he died. He said, "Surely you will meet your Lord and he will question you about your works." He asked the Muslims to take their guidance from the Quran and from his own example. This, he said, was the best way to live. He ordered them to cease living in the way they had before Islam. Revenge, one of the oldest traditions in Arabia, was ended forever. Usury was prohibited. Property was to be respected. Things which were previously forbidden during the 4 sacred months of the year, which were now forbidden at all times. He then commanded, "Know that every Muslim is a Muslim's brother," which was a completely new idea to the tribes who had so often quarreled in the past. He also said, "Allah has given everyone his due, exactly what each one deserves." After each point, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked, "Have I explained it well? Is it perfectly clear?" Everyone answered yes, for these were the people who would have to pass on the Prophet's message and instructions to those who were unable to be present that day and to future generations. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "I have left you 2 things. If you hold on to those things, you will be saved. They are Allah's book and the words of your Prophet." He then asked, "Have I not conveyed the message?" The multitude shouted out, "By Allah, yes." The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam ended, "O Allah, bear witness to that. This day those who disbelieve are in despair of your religion, so do not fear them, but fear me. This day I have perfected your religion for you, and I have completed my favor unto you, and have chosen for you as a religion al-Islam." Surah 5, Ayah 3. Many Muslims started to shed tears, knowing that if the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had completed his message, his life must be near its end. After spending the rest of the day of Arafah in prayer and contemplation, the Muslims began to complete the pilgrimage by returning to Mecca with the Talbiyah prayer still on their lips. The first night of the return journey was spent in Muzdalifah. Here they gathered pebbles which they carried with them the next day to Mina. There they stood before a huge rock and stoned it in remembrance of Ibrahim meeting with the devil in that very place. When Ibrahim alayhi salam received the order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to sacrifice his son Ismail as a test of faith, the devil, Shaitan, had tried to convince him not to do it. He came to Ibrahim alayhi salam at Mina as he was on his way to carry out Allah's command. But Ibrahim alayhi salam took some stones and hurled them at the devil to drive him away, since the casting of stones at Mina on the Prophet's farewell pilgrimage. This has become another ritual which Muslims perform on the annual pilgrimage to remind them that they too must continue to drive the devil away when he tries to prevent them from being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After throwing the stones, the pilgrims sacrificed sheep and camels and gave the meat to the poor. In this way, the great faith of Ibrahim alayhi salam was remembered. For when he had been ready to sacrifice Ismail, Allah sent a sheep in his place. The Muslims then completed the pilgrimage by again circling the Kaaba 7 times. They then cut their hair and nails and changed out their white clothes to show that they had returned to their daily lives. Before returning to Medina, the Muslims spent 3 nights in the valley of Medina, where the final preparations were made for the journey home. As for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made one final visit before leaving Mecca. This was to the grave of his devoted wife Khadija, who had been the first person to believe in Allah's revelation through him. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew that this would be the last time he would see the grave or Mecca, because during the pilgrimage he had received the chapter of the Quran called Help, from which he knew that his death was not far away. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.